So let's get started because the boss man says I got a hard 45 minutes and I got 9 pages to go through, and this is, you know me, I'm going to chase some rabbits out here, no pun intended, out there. So I thank you all for coming, and the people that were outside, I hope everybody got in here. That's nothing any more humbling than that, than to have that. On behalf of the park, I'd like to apologize for the arrangements. Everybody, as I went around the rooms, is telling me that they want to be outside. You know, I jumped through, actually Chris Gwinn jumped through a lot of hoops to get us the spot at the high school, you know, to park and to start that John B. Gordon tour, which we were supposed to be doing. But it just didn't pan out, you know. So, you know, it is what it is. Chris deserves a lot of credit for throwing this together on the fly, and my coworkers too for, you know, having all these programs in the can. There was no way I could put a John B. Gordon PowerPoint program together that fast. Well, I could, but I mean, I don't know what it looked like. You and I. So yeah. So I'm very humbled by that. I know a lot of you make that you've come to the program. I know a lot of you make your annual vacation here to Gettysburg for the anniversary, and it is a special time, and it's even a more special time because this is the country's 250th anniversary. And you know, some of us I can barely remember at 5 years old the bicentennial. Where the concrete truck backed up to the square in Houston, Mississippi and poured the concrete on the time capsule, which I'm going to be here for its opening 200 years from now. But right there. So if I have more time, and maybe we'll do this for the winter lecture, I have a story for y'all. It's called Banned from England. And I want to tell that story to you that happened to me this year, but I don't have time to do it, so you can just sit there and brew on it. Maybe I'll go on addressing Gettysburg. Ozzy got banned from Austin, Texas, and I got banned from London, England. Me, prize-winning, award-winning, upstanding citizen that I am, right here. So I have one in the can. As they say in the film industry. I have a talk about Jeb Stuart and his ride here, which is not exactly July 1st, but Chris grabbed at the idea when we were texting yesterday, and here we are. One of the gentlemen was up front, was when I was loading the program up, was wanting to know why he was getting the abridged program. Well, I cut 1,000 words out of this yesterday, so I could try to fit it in within 45 minutes. But you know, it's a little bit more detail on Robertson. I took out some on the Battle of Hanover, etc. So what I did was I condensed it down to the actual ride itself, and instead of going into some of the battles, if you want to call them that Jeb Stuart's in, I cut that out. So I'm like an old car, so let me try to get warmed up here. Get rolling, you know. What is the importance of Jeb Stuart? What is the importance of why Stuart's ride at Gettysburg? Well, the importance of Jeb Stuart is he is the cavalry leader. I'm going to start on the big plane up here. He is the cavalry leader of Lee's army, the Army of Northern Virginia. And what is the role of cavalry? And it took me a long time as a Southerner. If I mess it up, I want you to know that it took me a long time. And I got some people in the back there, the Maryland Sutler, that will testify to this. It took me a long time to figure out, being from Mississippi, that there is a difference. And there is. There's a difference between cavalry and cavalry. Okay? And I had to learn that once I came up north, because y'all are more familiar with cavalry than you are cavalry. All right? So that's a little sectional pun there. But If you think about it, the cavalry of the Army of Northern Virginia, or any army as far as the 19th century goes, is the eyes and the ears of the army. What they do is they advance on the side and the front and the flanks of the armies, and they gain intelligence on the enemy. And if there's one theme of this program, it's going to be about gaining intelligence and the lack of intelligence that comes from not having that information right here. So that's the importance of it. To give you the opposite, some of you are not familiar with Stuart's ride, but who gets here first at Gettysburg for the Union Army? Who's the first units here? Buford, and he is part of what branch? The cavalry. He is part of the cavalry. So he is in the vanguard of the Union Army, and he is feeling for the Confederate Army. So cavalry keeps the enemy they gain intelligence on the enemy, and they keep the enemy from gaining intelligence on you. Second thing, Jeb Stuart himself. And I'm going to gloss over. I cut a little bit out of his bio to condense it down a little bit. Jeb Stuart is very good at his job. He is a reconnaissance officer first and foremost. And I've been listening to a lot of Shelby Foote interviews for some reason popping up on YouTube lately. And there's been a few that I haven't seen. You might check them out. And I was at Tupelo, Mississippi one time when the, what was it called then? Civil War Trust? No, what was it before the Civil War Trust? American Preservation, APCWS? American Preservation for Civil War Sites. Am I really getting that dated? And they were raising money to buy 500 acres at the Battle of Bryce's Crossroads. And everybody was there was a Nathan Bedford Forrest fan. And somebody asked, they passed up these questionnaires to the panel up there, which I wasn't on. And I'm sitting in the back, and Shelby Foote is sitting on that table. And the question is, who was a better cavalryman, Jeb Stuart or Nathan Bedford Forrest? And all the panel, except one, raised their hand for Nathan Bedford Forrest. They're wanting to get out of the juke joint alive, And... And yeah, you better figure out which team you're rooting for real fast. And Shelby Foote sat at that table, and he says, he looked around, never forget, he looked down the table both ways, and he says, if none of y'all will speak for Jeb Stuart, I will. And Shelby Foote, in front of 500 people, got up there and said that Jeb Stuart was a first-class reconnaissance officer, unlike Nathan Bedford Forrest. And even more important, Robert E. Lee knew that the information that Stuart brought him was good. He could rely upon the information that was brought to him by Stuart. And my jaw dropped. And I learned right then and there that sometimes it's better to say what you think instead of what they want to hear. Okay? So I don't think that that's going to be, this is going to be too controversial besides the ride itself. So Jeb Stuart really doesn't need any introduction. He was born in 1833. He graduated from West Point in 1854. While attending West Point, he earned the nickname Beauty for his rugged looks. If I had to guess, of course, they never smile. I think Stuart had very bad crooked teeth and a sunken jaw. With that. I think that's why that's my guess. Hence, one of the reasons he's going to grow a beard that comes out in front of him right here. Stuart's U.S. Army life took him to Texas, where he was chasing Indians. He went to Bleeding, Kansas to try to quell the sectionalism there. He was in Washington, D.C. in 1859 and happened to be at the White House when news came that Harper's Ferry Arsenal had been taken over, and Stuart subsequently led a detachment of Marines to Harper's Ferry as an aide-de-camp to Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee. Yes, an Army officer led a contingent of Marines, which was the only troops they had in Washington. While there, he delivered Lee's ultimatum to surrender to the firehouse, and when the door opened, he recognized Osawatomie Brown from his days in Kansas. I thought you may be more impressed I could say Osawatomie right there. When Brown returned the ultimatum, Stuart dropped his hat and the Marines stormed the firehouse. It was actually Jeb Stuart that gave the signal to storm the firehouse. Now, who would have ever guessed that the story of the firehouse and everything else could be turned into a major motion film that was completely and historically accurate? Those of you that don't get that joke will have to watch the film. But it is, it is a grand cavalry charge against the firehouse. Right there. And who is the gentleman right here? Yeah, beside Errol Flynn. Who's the gentleman right here? Ronald Reagan. There you go. You might have missed that. Well, there he goes again. I do not wish to take advantage of my opponent's youth and inexperience. I remember watching that. So, I ran across an interesting story I hadn't heard before. In 1855, while stationed at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Stuart is going to meet a young lady who is the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Philip St. George Cook. Her name was Flora. And Stuart quickly fell in love, and the couple were engaged shortly thereafter. Stuart would later write, and this is the point, I may can do Osawatomie, but I don't do Latin. One of the few courses that I dropped in college. Veni, vita, victus sum, if I even got any of that right, which means I came, I saw, I conquered. So his letters to Florist are still at the Library of Congress, and that's what she looked like. That's who he was. She was by his side when he was killed. When he passed away in 1964. Skipping forward to the Civil War, Stuart resigned his commission after Virginia's secession. He got his first star in September of 1861. And you remember his Black Horse Cavalry was the ones charging at the Battle of First Manassas, the Black Horse Cavalry. And it caused, this rumor of their existence caused great consternation among the young Union Army under McDowell. And so he gets the star. I've had to see what he got promoted for, but September 61, and he was promoted to second star in July of 62. Now, why does he get the second star? Probably because he rode completely around the Union Army, another Union Army, that was outside of Richmond, Virginia. It's called the Ride Around McClellan, McClellan's Ride. And so it was all the sensation in the news. That's July of 62. What year is the Battle of Gettysburg? 63. So that is only a year before. Now, in viewing the Gettysburg Campaign through historical lenses, one must remember that Stuart's claim to fame prior to the battle was his celebrated ride around the Union armies. He did it in June of 62, but he also did it in October of 62. A lot of Civil War buffs forget that. The press and public went wild. In May of 63, at the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stuart temporarily took over command of Jackson's infantry corps and finished the battle. Now you fast forward to June of 1863, and as Lee prepares to march north, he moves his corps to Culpeper. His corps to Culpeper, or as my daughters say, his corpses. On June 9th, Joe Hooker sends his cavalry across the Rappahannock to see what Lee was up to, and they surprised Stuart at a place called Brandy Station. Now this turns out to be the largest cavalry engagement of the war and ends with the Union cavalry retreating. But Stuart is surprised, and the papers are not kind to him. Now in the midst of all of Stuart's bad press and all of his woes, his boss, Robert E. Lee, was planning a full-scale invasion of the North. As the infantry corps entered the Shenandoah Valley, Stuart is ordered to guard the Blue Ridge Mountain passes and keep prying Yankee eyes from finding out what the Confederate Army is up to. What did I say the role of cavalry is? And of course, Hooker wants to know what Lee is up to. And so what does Hooker do with his cavalry? He sends the Union cavalry to find out to see what Lee is up to by trying to break through those passes in the Blue Ridge Mountains. This results in the battles of Aldie, Middleburg, and Upperville, June 17th, 19th, and 21st. And Stuart is able to fend off these Union cavalry probes, but all these three little skirmishes come at the cost of 500 men. In the midst of all this fighting, John Mosby, the gray ghost of the Confederacy, the guerrilla fighter who was based in Northern Virginia behind Union lines, did score a coup, though, for Stuart. Backing up to June 17th in the fight at Aldie, after the battle, Mosby went out on a scout behind enemy lines and captured Major William Sterling of Hooker's staff and Captain Benjamin Fisher, the acting signal officer of the entire Army of the Potomac. The men carried two documents which Mosby stated, quote, as a letter of instructions to Pleasanton, that's the cavalry commander, and with it a statement of the strength of Hooker's army. That was a windfall that Mosby supplied. These dispatches are important because they revealed Hooker did not know the exact location of the Confederate Infantry Corps. The captured documents also stated the Union infantry would stand pat until the cavalry revealed information of the enemy's movements. Chief of Staff Dan Butterfield concluded in the captured documents, if Lee's army is in rear of his cavalry, we shall move up by forced marches with the infantry. End of quote. This information was passed along to Robert E. Lee, and the big point is this. Lee thinks that Hooker is still trying to get through the Blue Ridge passes to stop his progress north. That is Lee's impression on this date. Now all this is going to be shifting as Stuart and Lee start to formulate this plan. Now this 4 days later. If I could have a room full of you up here on the front row, I would quit and I would go and, do something else. I can't think of too many jokes I can do nowadays without upsetting somebody, though. Comedy is just in a bad state. No, I'm not going to say that joke. 4 days later, after the Battle of Upperville on June 21st, Stuart rode over the mountain for a personal meeting with his chief, Robert E. Lee, near Paris, Virginia. The meeting is important because it was here that Stuart first broached how his cavalry would advance into Pennsylvania. Lee initially wanted Stuart to leave some cavalry at the gaps and ride beside the infantry north. And Stuart, though, argued according to Charles Marshall. When I keep naming Charles Marshall, if you don't know who Marshall is, that's two of Lee's primary staff officers, Walter Taylor and Charles Marshall. It is generally Marshall who is writing the reports. Taylor is the chief of staff. So Marshall's memoirs and Taylor's memoirs, if you're going to do a study on the Confederate side of the Army of Northern Virginia, are just, if I walked in your house and didn't see those on the bookshelf, I'll probably hang out, smoke a cigarette or something, but we're leaving. Okay? Something like that. I see Madam back there in the middle that you smoke. Okay. So Charles Marshall. Lee initially wanted Stuart to leave some cavalry at the gaps and ride beside the infantry north. Stuart, though, argued, according to Marshall, that, quote, that he could move down with his cavalry near Hooker and annoy him if he attempted to cross the river. And when he found that he was crossing, he could rejoin the army in good time. Stuart argued that he could move down with his cavalry near Hooker and annoy him if he attempted to cross the river. And then he told Robert E. Lee that if he's crossing, I can come back and I can get behind the army and come up. Why is that important? Why is Charles Marshall important? Because he's in the room with them as a staff officer, and he's listening to all this. And so, he's writing from firsthand knowledge. Now, Lee's final report encapsulates his directions to Stuart. Marshall wrote that Lee verbally informed Stuart about his route and role with the Army. June 22nd was a momentous day in the Stuart story. June 22nd at 7:45 in the morning. 7:45 in the morning. Stuart reported the enemy withdrawing to the east from the passes, meaning they're headed in the opposite direction. Stuart forwarded the information to Longstreet. Why is that? Because Longstreet is bringing up the rear of the Army. He is the senior commander on the field. Lee is trucking north personally, all right? So Longstreet is there coordinating everything. Okay, so he communicates to Longstreet, as he's probably been told to do. And Longstreet forwards the message to Lee. Of course, there's going to be a delay. Where to and with what intentions the Union Army was moving, Lee did not know. And he didn't want the Federals to cross the Potomac before he knew about it. Lee needed Stuart to find out Hooker's intentions. Robert E. Lee wants to know what the Union Army is up to. As he moves west over the Blue Ridge Mountains into the Shenandoah Valley, and he's getting on to Interstate 81, and he's planning on coming up in here into the north. He is very interested on what's happening on the other side of the mountains. Is the Union Army headed south to Richmond? Are they remaining around Washington? Or are they crossing the Potomac? He had just fought. We forget how close because it takes us so long to learn about this. The Battle of Antietam had just happened in September of 62. This is June of 63. Think about what a short time period that is. That's only a few months. It's not even a year. And what happened during the Antietam campaign? The Union Army marched fast, got to Frederick, crossed over the mountains, and almost destroyed Lee's army piecemeal before he could gather them together at Sharpsburg. Lee does not want that to happen again. He is learning from his mistakes, and he wants to do better the next time, as anybody, that wants to be good at it would. So, because of this, it was at this point that Robert E. Lee authorized James Ewell Brown Stuart to go ahead with his ride. Stuart can't find out what the Union Army is doing if he remains at the mountain passes. So Stuart will head east to find out what the Union Army is about. Lee wrote Stuart, in the same letter, Lee advised Stuart that the vanguard of the Army of Northern Virginia, that would be Richard Ewell's corps, would move toward the Susquehanna River in two columns, one via Emmitsburg. Think about where that is, right across the Maryland border, not far from us right here, and one via Chambersburg. Emmitsburg, Chambersburg, that's the original intent right here. That's where Stuart expects to find the Confederate Army in that vicinity. That's going to be one of the last communications he has with Robert E. Lee. So he's thinking, remember when I get into Stuart's ride, that's his mindset as he's going through Maryland. I've got to get to these locations and surely I'll find the rebels. In a cover letter to Stuart, Longstreet also cautioned Stuart, quote, not to leave us, therefore, unless you can take the proposed route and rear the enemy. Later that evening, Mosby came into Stuart's headquarters and reported that he had ascertained the location of every Federal corps in Hooker's army. Mosby told Stuart that he knew where every piece of the Union Army was in Virginia. Mosby then recommended a route through the Bull Run Mountains and through the Union Army. Stuart told Mosby that Lee wished to know if the Union Army was moving north to cross the Potomac. And so Mosby dutifully crossed the Bull Run Mountains that evening with 2 men, and shortly thereafter took 6 federal prisoners and sent them and a dispatch back to Stuart. There is nothing like live intelligence, if you can do. Wouldn't you like to know who those poor 6 souls were that he took? The next morning, June 23rd, Stuart sent 2 dispatches to Lee, dated at 9 o'clock and 10:30 in the morning. These dispatches aren't recorded, though. Charles Marshall, Lee's aide, recorded, though, that the Army commander, quote, anxious about the matter and desired to guard against the possibility of error, and desired me to repeat it, which I did, and dispatched the second letter. What Marshall is saying is that Lee, in his very formal manner, turned to his staff officer and told him to dictate an order reiterating to Jeb Stuart that he was to withdraw to the west if he encountered the Federal Army moving north. And Lee did not want any error to occur right here. The June 23rd letter read, the next morning. So here we see between the June 22nd and June 23rd messages is Lee's apprehension about Stuart's proposed route. If Hooker's army is not moving, he can attempt to ride around it. But if Hooker is moving west toward the mountain gaps, Stuart needs to withdraw to the rear of the Army of Northern Virginia. Is this making sense so far? There's a lot of information going on. It took me forever to piece this thing together. And I think I understand it as I did I understood the Battle of Gettysburg until I read the second book. Okay. Thank you, sir. You're probably the only one that got that joke. I would also like to add to the nice lady over here that can't put her handbag. I am a connoisseur of ladies' handbags. And I have not seen that model of Coach before, right there. But I do think is that the new summer edition that you have there? Yeah. What I do at the front desk to entertain myself, you know. I'm also a connoisseur of European handbags, ladies, as they come up. There's some models out there I haven't seen. I can pick them up coming up here. I said, right there. Interesting. What a nice shade of blue you have there. Oh, that color is rather warm for my taste. A momentary interlude. Now let's take a moment to study both options for Stuart's advance into Pennsylvania. Lee initially wanted Stuart's command to remain with the army and cross the Potomac west of the mountains. This option, of course, would be far less fraught with potential mishaps or loss of communication. However, think about this. It would make Stuart ride in the rear of 2 of Lee's infantry corps and all the wagon trains, etc., that go with it. Stuart also would have to cross the South Mountain Range in Maryland to get in touch with Ewell. During this whole movement by Stuart, he would be of little help to Lee because he would be in the rear and out of touch with the enemy. So what I'm basically saying is like, when you're caught in a traffic jam, how do you get to the front of the line? That's a very difficult thing to do. And we think of, or maybe some of you think of a Civil War army as staying in their lane. And you probably think of the lane as being like our modern roads of having 2 lanes going back and forth. A Civil War army on the move takes the whole road and then some. I mean, staff officers, I've read time and again, both sides would take to the fields to make better time than the road. I mean, they're really jammed up. So if Stuart wants to do that, ride into Maryland and cross over then he's going to have, his own problems. Where are we? So if you're looking at my dot right here, here's Fredericksburg at the bottom. Stuart initially comes out here, and here's the Shenandoah River right through here, right? Ashby's, Manassas Gap, Ashby's Gap, etc. These Bull Run Mountains right over here. And so this is where all this activity, which I've been talking about, Aldi, Middleburg, right in here, they're trying to get through this area. So what Stuart's options were is he could come up here if the Union Army's not moving. He could basically do what the Union Army did during the Antietam campaign. He could get somewhere around Frederick. He may not have gone exactly there. And then he could head west over the mountains. But the Confederate Army should be up here by now. So he'd be behind it. Now the route east of the mountains was more hazardous. That's going to be on this side over here, right? Stuart would have to navigate the Bull Run Mountains, various Union Corps, and find a fordable crossing of the Potomac, and then a lengthy and fast ride through Maryland. However, there were 3 advantages to Stuart crossing east of the mountains. Number 1, he could disrupt communications. Number 2, Stuart could monitor and report on the Union Army's movements. Number 3, the route east of the mountains was the shorter of the 2. So to encapsulate Lee's expectations, Lee gave Stuart permission to cross over the Bull Run Mountains, ride into the Federal rear, and cause as much destruction as possible. But as soon as Stuart found the Union Army crossing the Potomac, he was to join Ewell and help the Army of Northern Virginia on the right flank. Now, this is where it starts going off kilter right here. Lee expected Stuart to leave on June 24th and cross the Potomac on June 25th. Leave on the 24th, cross the Potomac on the 25th. Meanwhile, back with Stuart, Mosby returned on June 24th and gave the important news that the Union Army remained stationary. Mosby told Stuart that the Union Army was still stationary. Keep that in mind. Stuart then made the momentous decision to ride around the Union Army. Stuart instructed Mosby once again to cross the Bull Run Mountains and proceed to Drainsville to locate a crossing point across the river for the cavalry. Now Stuart had to make the decision on which of his 5 brigades to take on the expedition. I've noticed over the years working here that students of the campaign are intrigued by Jeb Stuart's choices of what he took on the raid. And basically what happens here is out of the 5 brigades, he has Wade Hampton, 1,978 men, Beverly Robertson on the lower left, he has 966 men. Lower right is W.E. Grumble Jones, 1,743 men. Fitzhugh Lee on the upper left corner is 2,164, and John Chambliss is 1,328 men. Look at this group of generals. Who does Stuart take? He takes Hampton, Lee, and Chambliss with him. He leaves behind Robertson and Grumble Jones to guard the mountain passes. He leaves behind 2,709 men. And of course, they're going to cover the rear also. So why take his 2 best brigade commanders under Lee and Hampton and leave behind arguably his weakest, which is Beverly Robertson, in independent command? Right there. It's an interesting question. Right? Why does he take those? Well, there's a lot of speculation about that. One of the reasons may have been, and I can't prove or disprove, but to go back to Flora, Jeb Stuart's wife, Jones may have been after her in the pre-war years. So, I don't know what you're thinking about. I know, cogitate that, FBI, but yeah, right there. Some things die hard, Some people are less than professional. And, you know, Robertson, who are you going to leave in second in command? Who is going to be that? If he is on this expedition and something happens to Jeb Stuart, if I'm correct on this, and Jeb Stuart is fatally hurt or killed, Robertson would assume command, senior commander right there. So is that who you want stuck in the middle of Maryland running that thing? And what did Robertson subsequently do with his semi-independent command? From June 25th to June 27th, as the Union Army marched north and across the front of Robertson's command, Robertson never reported, never ascertained that the Union Army was on the move. In fact, he retained his position at the Blue Ridge until June 29th, 2 days after the Army of the Potomac had crossed into Maryland. And on June 30th, Lee himself summoned the 2 cavalry brigades to, quote unquote, to rejoin the army without delay. So, you know, people criticize Lee that he had cavalry, he just didn't use them. Well, he had cavalry, but he didn't have, and I can't drive this home enough, people. Go back to the beginning of this program. My boss is always hitting me for lack of a theme. He did not have Jeb Stuart, is what he does not end up having. He had Robertson and Jones. And Jones is competent, you know. Now back to Stuart. Oh, that's Robertson. There's good. Who posed him like that? That would be my first thing. As soon as that wet plate come out, I would get that photographer in a headlock, is what I would have done. And by the time we got finished, that photographer's head would match mine. Is what we'll be doing right there. Thank you, Al. I'm glad you appreciated that. So Stuart's column left at 1 o'clock a.m. on June 25th. Lee expected once again to leave on June 24th and cross the Potomac on the 25th. He's already behind. He's already behind by 24, 36, 48 hours right here. So Stuart crosses the mountains at Glasscock Gap. Lee anticipated that Stuart would cross the Blue Ridge further north at Hopewell Gap, and therefore closer to the Potomac. As fate would have it, as soon as Stuart reached Haymarket, who I would like you to know, if you ever get to Haymarket, you get on 15, go all the way down 15, and you'll come across Haymarket. When you hit the McDonald's at Haymarket, I would like you to know at the grand opening, I was the first person to use the bathroom. At the Haymarket McDonald's right there. And every time you go by Haymarket, I want you to think of me. Right there. My friend Rob Orson will testify to it to this day. Now, when he gets to Haymarket, Stuart that is, not me, he ran slam into Hancock's Second Corps, who had been ordered north that very morning. Stuart had to divert to the southeast as a result. Was this the point where Stuart should have turned back and joined Lee's army on the western side? He chose to keep going. After all, it was still the shortest route. However, celerity was now the watchword. Celerity. The other unintended consequence of Hancock blocking Stuart's path was that Mosby was now cut off from his rendezvous with Stuart, and therefore Stuart lost his guide to the Potomac crossing. That's just the happenstance, the fate of war right there, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. On June 26, Greenwich, Bristow Station, and Wolf Run Shoals. Remember, Lee expected Stuart to cross the Potomac the day before. Right here. Let's see. Is that on here? Manassas Junction, Bristow. This is where he is. Right? He's already supposed to be up here in this area. He's down here. And remember, he's not in a car. June 27th. Stuart crosses the Occoquan and rides on to Fairfax Courthouse. Here at Fairfax, Stuart sent a note to Richmond and Lee, and therefore Lee, stating that the Federals were moving north. Lee never got the message. However, June 27th does mark the first time Lee inquires about Stuart's whereabouts. Remember, I'm going to say it again. Lee expected Stuart to be across the Potomac by now, 2 days earlier. Stuart's column reaches the Potomac at Rouse's Ford that evening. The river is high and Stuart is running behind time. Showing resilience, Stuart crossed the column on a moonless night. The water came over the pommel of the men's saddles, and when the 6 guns from the horse artillery crossed, the limbers and the caissons literally went underwater. The shells were literally emptied from the limbers and carried by individual riders across the stream one by one to get that ammunition across the Potomac. It was a remarkable achievement by Stuart and his men. But the crossing exhausted the already tired horses, and the column was forced to start to graze them again. Stuart told Charles Marshall after the campaign that he sent a third message to Lee, and that this message didn't get through either. June 28th, Stuart later wrote, I realized the importance of joining our army in Pennsylvania and resumed the march northward early on this day. To expedite progress, Stuart broke his column into 2 parts. Later that day, the column entered Rockville, Maryland, and here took the oft-discussed capture of 125 wagons. So Rockville is right here for those in the back, right? Lee is probably expecting him over here by now. Stuart is right here in Rockville, and he runs across 125 wagons. Holy smokes. Colonel Beall of the 9th Virginia wrote, quote, the wagons were brand new, the mules fat and sleek, and the harnesses in use for the first time. Lord have mercy. They done stolen a brand new car. Such a train we had never seen before and did not see again. That's a big train. The wagons were loaded with primarily, and a lot of people overlook this, what was in the wagons? Oats and corn. And what does Stuart need for fuel? He needs that. He doesn't need grass. If you're not a horse person, you can feed horses on grass, but you can't run them on grass. They got to have more energy, more calories than that. So it's oats and corn. This was a windfall. But also bread, crackers, whiskey, sugar, and hams. Woo, Lord have mercy. You know we're going to have some sliced ham over there too. Ooh, maybe with some French mustard. Now, who is in dire need of oats and corn? He couldn't resist the temptation. And now he was tethered to the pace of the mules. Mules don't move as fast as horses. June 29th, by this time, Stuart had taken the 4 mule teams and reduced them to 2 mules in order to shorten the length. Stuart's column reaches Westminster about 5 o'clock in the evening of June 29th. Stationed at Westminster were companies C and D of the 1st Delaware Cavalry under the command of Napoleon B. Knight, who is pictured on his horse here. On June 29th, in town. That's what I bring to the table right here. Well, long story short, Knight hears about Stuart approaching the town. He decides to go to the bar to contemplate the current situation. And Knight sends out Captain Charles Corbett with 2 squadrons, and they valiantly charged down the road, all 95 of them. And when they charged, labeled, quote unquote, more gallant than judicious by one Confederate, results in 67 cavalrymen out of 95 becoming casualties. Yeah, that one, yeah, they found them all right. Corbett's charge. The big claim to fame is that it delayed Stuart getting to Gettysburg, but in my opinion, that is not true. Stuart's column continues to Union Mills that evening to encamp, and Stuart himself sleeps while straddling a chair in Westminster. And the real reason any Confederate cavalry stopped in Westminster, is they could find that they found grain and oats again at the railroad depot. But it's still pretty cool. I mean, you know, we all like the charge of the Light Brigade. Yeah. So, yeah, it's nice to think. At Union Mills, the Confederate horsemen got 4 hours of sleep. How long do you think they've been in the saddle so far, working across the Potomac? These horses are tired, everything else. They've been in the saddle 48 hours. Now, I want to take a moment to look at why Stuart is so far apart from Lee's army. And here's a map by our former ranger and good friend of mine, John Heiser, that shows the different routes of Meade's army. Now notice the wide imprint the Union Army makes across Maryland. Once Stuart gets caught on the wrong side of the Union Army, he keeps being pushed to the east, away from Lee. And at this point in Stuart's ride, the rebel chieftain actually well appraised of the Union Army's whereabouts. For instance, he noted in his report that he knew that the Union Army was pushing north from Frederick. He also knew of a Union force at Taneytown. Now, speaking of that, June 30th, I'm expecting any minute my boss to walk through the door, so we're going to hurry right along. So as Ben Kenobi said to Han Solo in the cantina, let us just say, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to avoid any imperial entanglements right here. June 30th, Stuart learns that Kilpatrick's Union Cavalry Division is at Littlestown. In order to avoid a confrontation, that's not that far down the road, people. You can get on Baltimore Pike and be in Littlestown in 10 minutes. Stuart turns his column toward Hanover. The only problem was Kilpatrick was headed there too. So the two sides bump into each other at Hanover. And this precipitates a fight. Let me show you before I go to real quickly right here. We're up here. June 30th, right? So they're at Hanover. And this comes out as they get into a fight. While the fighting raged, Stuart read several northern newspapers stating that Jubal Early's division, the Confederate Army, was in York, Pennsylvania. Stuart, therefore, extricated his command from the Hanover battle and once again rode further east through Jefferson, Pennsylvania, which I might add has a very rare Confederate cannon sitting in the circles, not even on a carriage right there. In Jefferson, I don't know how they got that thing, but it's an iron Confederate Napoleon, which just got hit by a car. Okay, so it's laying on the ground in case you want to go by and see it right now. And on New York, well, I think the cannon won. Don't worry about the cannon. I worry about the car. Stuart's intelligence was right about Early. Early was at York, and he heard firing in the distance. But unlike what Stuart contended in his report, Early didn't know a thing about rendezvousing with him. Early's not looking for Stuart, and he's not going to go over and find out why that cannon's firing. It's not his problem, okay? He doesn't know. And Early marched on. Perhaps Stuart might have caught up with him, except he still had the wagon train. And folks, we now know that it was a mistake, and well, guess what? They knew it was too at the time. Henry McClellan, Stuart's aide, quote, "All this day we could see that it would have been better had Stuart here destroyed the captured wagons, but it was not in Stuart's nature to abandon an attempt until it had been proven to be beyond his powers. And he determined to hold on to his prize until the last moment. This was unfortunate." Stuart wrote in his report, "Our wagon train was now a serious embarrassment, but I thought making a detour to the right by Jefferson, I could save it. I therefore determined to try it, particularly as I was satisfied from every accessible source of information, as well as from the lapse of time, that the Army of Northern Virginia must be near the Susquehanna." Stuart reached Jefferson at 6:30 p.m. He went around the circle there, observed the rare Confederate cannon there, and then rode on. Afterwards, Stuart reported, quote, whole regiments slept in the saddle. If you ever get to Jefferson, remember that. Confederate cavalrymen sleeping as they go around the square. Right there. Their faithful animals keeping the road unguided. In some instances, they fell from their horses, overcome with physical fatigue and sleepiness. Adding to the woes was the news that Early had already departed York, destination unknown. With a crystal ball, we now know Early was only 10 miles distant, headed to Gettysburg. Stuart's intelligence indicated that Early was marching for Shippensburg. So in order to cut it off, the column marched for Carlisle. So Jeb Stuart thinks that Early's column is right here. And so therefore, follow the arrows. He's going toward York. He detours. He therefore goes to Carlisle, looking for, and sends out feelers over here to Shippensburg. Shippensburg being between Carlisle and Chambersburg, right here, where I'm hoping my 18-year-old son goes to college because I have prepaid on that level for him. But I don't, every time college comes up, I say, shh, shh, shh. I know, Dad. But we'll see, the more I push. July 1st, Stuart reaches Carlisle and finds it occupied by militia. He demands surrender, which is refused. He runs his cannon out in sight of the town and again demands surrender, and he is again refused, and the cannon's open. And they start banging around and nothing gets settled. But finally, Major Charles Venable of Lee's staff arrived to tell Stuart to move to Gettysburg. Stuart rode through the night for Gettysburg with only his staff, and somewhere around dawn, Stuart stopped under a copse of trees and went to sleep for 2 hours. Stuart arrived in Gettysburg on the afternoon of July 2nd, and he must have arrived alone, or perhaps his adjutant Henry McClellan accompanied him. Where he reported to Lee is not known. Most people assume it was the Thompson house or the vicinity, and that is really locked into people's mindset since the movie came out, because that's reportedly where it took place, or at least that scene in the Thompson house. What was said is not exactly known either. E.P. Alexander reported Lee said, "Well, General, you are here at last." Lee's statement is not to be construed as praise. Okay? A second-hand or maybe third-hand account comes from Thomas Munford, who was a Confederate cavalryman, who claimed he got this story from Henry McClellan. Munford said the reunion was, quote, painful beyond description. Upon seeing Stuart, Lee reportedly raised his arm in the air and remarked, "General Stuart, where have you been? For 8 days, not one word have I heard from you." Stuart didn't challenge the commander, but Lee did listen to Stuart's response and then looked directly into Stuart's eyes. "You are the eyes and the ears of the army. We will not now discuss this." And Mumford thought Lee had anger at first, but then quickly turned to concern, as was his custom, about the feelings of the other person. Lee ordered Stuart to the left. And let me tell you something, I don't mean to divert into this, but he hasn't come through the door yet, right here. Charles Marshall wrote Lee's report for the aftermath of the Gettysburg Campaign. And apparently, I don't think the rough draft exists. Marshall wrote a very lengthy, several paragraphs on Stuart's movements there. And I might add, as a tangent, that the report, Lee's final report on the Gettysburg Campaign, was held up because Marshall had to repeatedly ask Jeb Stuart for a copy of it so he could complete the report. Stuart wasn't submitting it. And if you ever read Jeb Stuart's report, you can go and read it online or get your official records book out today. if you read very closely toward the end when Stuart's finishing his report, Jeb Stuart actually has the audacity to write in the report that the Confederate Army should have been where he thought they were. That's exactly what he says. You talk about, right there. But whatever Marshall wrote in that report, when it hit Lee's desk, and this goes to like Pickett's report, when it hit Lee's desk, whatever happened in that report, Lee edited the report. Is it Robert E. Lee's report? Yes, because Lee edits it, and he hands it back to Marshall to put the final copy on it. But Lee struck everything out of Marshall's report. And he simply states in that report, if you read it today, the movements of the Army were embarrassed by the lack of cavalry. Stop, period, whole paragraph. The only thing that is said in that report about that whole movement right there. Succinct, to the point, not verbose. What else can you say? Right there. That was it. One more paragraph and I'll let you go. Historians remain divided on how much the defeat at Gettysburg was due to Stuart's failure to keep Lee informed. Edward G. Longacre, who I had to do, my poor soul picked that book out to do a book report in the 8th grade. Handwritten, 5 pages, and I thought, my God, I thought I'd never get through Longacre. Lord have mercy. I've never read that book since. Right there. In whole. Argues that Lee deliberately gave Stuart wide discretion in his orders. Edwin B. Coddington refers to the tragedy, quote unquote, of Stuart and the Gettysburg Campaign and judges that when Fitzhugh Lee raised the question of, quote, whether Stuart exercised the discretion undoubtedly given to him judiciously, the answer is no, agreeing that Stuart's absence permitted Lee to be surprised at Gettysburg. Coddington points out that the Union commander was just as surprised. Edward J. Wittenberg and David Petruzzi have concluded that there was, quote, plenty of blame to go around, unquote, and the fault should be divided between Stuart and the lack of specificity in Lee's orders and Richard S. Ewell, who might have tried harder to link up with Stuart northeast of Gettysburg. Jeffrey D. Wirt acknowledges that Lee, his officers, and fighting by the Army of the Potomac bear the responsibility for the Confederate loss at Gettysburg, but states, quote, Stuart failed Lee and his army in the reckoning at Gettysburg. Lee trusted him and gave him discretion, but Stuart acted injudiciously. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it.